Alright, that Yamlin Jevala, Le, Dambos, Lana, Casa Tomara, and Nichiki Shingi Tula Dene, and they give you some day, and they give you somebody ya, New Bachelor Tangore, says. Just not that give you Shingi Tula Dene, said Rangi Lama, that give you Shinyalia, Dembata, and the Sanji Guda, Deniki, Part, Danger, Chopuya, Desalia, and Jiki, Dosinic, Geshe Thubten some Dorje, Delia. Chazawa, Chowa Puyala, Sopa, Deva Chibeton, Jin, and Gard, Bendigo Trupje, and then to give so the junior Kawa to Tunchewa, some Tatine, Chiwa Mitapati, some Tatine, Tondaning board in Yamsule, Zodi, that Chike, Gavile Sayadiris, Chitan Gavile, Cassia Satubine, then Dibile the Mata to Gura, Pont to Gura, Chitan Gavila Sayadis, Give. Good
morning. So yesterday we saw how for us as beginners we should start at the very beginning. From the very beginning we should rely on our spiritual teacher, and at the start of every formal practice session, set up our shrine with the images of representing the Buddha's body, speech and mind, call to mind our spiritual teacher, and then make offerings and so forth, and then engage in meditations on topics such as precious human rebirth, the impermanence of this life, and so forth. And in this way, we establish a foundation of our training to accumulate virtue and to transform our very way of thinking. The 17th verse. Thus, in order to rely on the roots, exert oneself principally in the profound and vast teachings without exception. From now, be amongst those who put this into practice and make prayers for those who cannot yet.
She's not that our Shile Ligua, Zawana, Zawa Karela, and she did a Ligua. She's not Zawala, Zawala, and Zo, Tangbo, Yamneji, this Google, what has been a single mouse on a Tangbo Jed in Zawala Grua, then a Ligua. She's a Tangbo, yes, it's a said Google. She's not that Tangbo Yamneji, Zawa Yamneji, Zawa the Yamneji, Zo, Zawadi, Tangbo Yamneji, the Caresa Shirua. She's not Delia. Zawa said, this or the Manzukasan Shuba Nashi, and the Tambo, and the Jiggy, that you don't show us, Casa, Yakawa, Samata, don't show us Samata, the Jig, Namsing Emero, came, the nigger Samta, Chua Mitava Samta, the Nan Jiggy, Givili, Jeva in the Teletine, Chivu, Tiki Yunguba Samtane, Givili a gang to the Chedi, that's all the Yamnechi or Zawa, said the Shi Zawa Tambo Yamnechi, Zawa Shiboti. And the Dela said the Givi Shinyal Den Tubachi, Tubig, they didn't get some Dachi, Delia, Danger, Yamin, Zorchi, or Bezu Zorchi, Bezu Zortambo, let them with Bezu Zorchi, or the order.
So, looking at the first line, that's in order to rely on the roots. So roots, then we should understand, just like if one is planting something, the first thing that grows is the root. So by roots, we should understand the very beginning of our practice should be those 4 that we looked at in verse 14. Reflecting on this precious human rebirth that we've achieved, though it's rare and difficult to achieve, it has great potential, is the second. This life, though, that we have achieved is impermanent, or this opportunity to practice is impermanent. That's the third, and the fourth being then apply oneself in the understanding of cause and effect. So this then is the very root of what we should rely on.
Ada jikanzogi gewili ane karna samdaje gewili 가보디기 냠네 지구레시도 이디나데 냠렌치에 삼다에 등아nom이 가산도 야시야시 슈바 나시 알 룽아 이순이 주든비 추름송야다 근데 쇠버콤이야 근데 지게 쇠버콤시도 인지미지 미션다게 소술 네버기지 쇠버콤이야라 인지미지 이거야 말들 쇠버콤이스 소수인 냠렌지도 갑라야 직강을 채셔베네 최냠네 제바 강한 티도 델야 쇠버콤 두제 근데 지금이야 돼 쇠버콤이야 용거다 쇠버콤나 돼 쇠버콤이야 디소 지나 안디마세다 갈비냠레 기위레 냠레 제도 아니 진바다 수트는 쇠바다 디나데나 삼다야 용거레 셰라베 용거와 되네거 두차사다 간주기 냠레 제고레스 디나데다 자와 당보 가르치고라서네 다제 수트임소야다 안 쇠보kom야다 진베 냠레 제 디수토고레스 디제라다 간주기 겔리 데 삼다야 냠레데다 셰라 냠레디게 용거레스지 가사디 당보들라 당보디게 냠레 약보용나 난디제게 삼라 냠레 라마디게 삼된다다 셰레 냠레디게 하네 직 레라지 용구레 사지 가상 슈바나지 두치네 난 냠레지 데솔레 쪼르치네 냠레 제고레 사지 송도와 지상저 자와디 시디 냠레 쪼 제고레 지자디 냠레 쪼 제베 있는 Lama samdana shira nyamla dige and the lela jungures Kasangati Shubanaji disungorata zo sidu zo begore zo bezujin yamne jewore sidu zo de kare yamne zo chedi nangbo shidi yamne zo chewore se dene zo chebane Lama and disuina samdana shira nyamne dige yabu jungures Kasang Shebanaji jibasiore.
And the first line concludes with exert oneself principally. So this then refers to the 4 practices that we saw that we should engage in immediately, because these are what lead to developing our foundation for our ongoing spiritual journey. Firstly, they lead to an excellent future rebirth, as well as being the foundation for all the later training, such as concentration and wisdom. So what these practices are found within the 4 roots, and are referenced within the presentation on cause and effect, in that they are illustrations of the accumulation of virtuous karma. So here we are being advised to exert oneself principally by training repeatedly over a sustained period in, firstly, ethical restraint, where we restrain our mind from coming under the influence of the afflictions, we restrain our speech from being unethical, we restrain our physical behavior from being unethical. And secondly, generosity, and then thirdly, patience. And patience, just to make one additional point, usually, as has been said thus far, patience is a mind that stays undisturbed in the face of adversity. Usually, when we think of the need to practice patience when we face adversity, we usually think about this in the context of when we encounter someone else, someone who acts towards us or speaks towards us in a manner we find disagreeable. So that is an illustration where one needs to practice patience, where one needs to keep one's mind undisturbed. But in addition to that, one needs to be patient with with the obstacles that one will encounter with one's own spiritual development. Because the process of training our mind, we need to engage in repeatedly over a sustained period. So to do so, undoubtedly, we will experience many hardships, many difficulties. And when encountering these, we should ensure our mind stays undisturbed. In other words, we do not get overwhelmed by the hardships that we encounter. So that's to say something extra on patience. And there's additional practices to include is joyous perseverance. So these 4 are the foundational practices that we should primarily engage in, because they establish the quality of mind that will enable us to engage in the additional practices, those such as concentration and wisdom.
Linege, that is in a zoo, Dambo, Delipe, Yamna Cheoration. And then Sabshin get you China Maluba, Dine, Sabata, Saba and Gacheviki, and the Yamle Rimbatike, and Jehores, Machasan Yamlen Jehores, subject Gachuna Malubas, Seviki, Yamle Rimbat, and Gachiva Lam Yirimbigi, Rimba, Yamle Rimba Chasan Jehores.
The second line, in the profound and vast teachings without exception. So all of the teachings that are categorized as profound, as well as all of those within the vast, those teachings that are categorized as vast, these should be trained in without exception.
Dike nyamne che gores sabching side jezad saba tongbanyi tope sherap dike sosu gyula kine nyamlen je denege tongbanyi la mibi gi shine ju samde shine ju jine shine ta khasanga to samde nyamle shine ju ya da di dene na shine tongbanyi de la mine laodong ju ya ge odu shi nyamlen che gores sabching se disi gorwada.
Those teachings which are considered profound, refer to the topic of emptiness, the topic of how things exist in reality, as well as then the cultivation of the wisdom that understands how things exist in reality. In other words, the wisdom realizing emptiness. And in particular, for this understanding, this wisdom, to have sufficient strength of mind to be able to eliminate the very root of our suffering, we also need to train in single points of concentration and develop meditative insight. Bringing these two together, the union of calm abiding and meditative insight, together with the wisdom realizing emptiness. So this is then included in the teachings that are profound.
Na gyachewa sire gyachewa lamni riba sire da khasang shuba na shin ane simja damjela mi pigi jamba kye komya ane simja mi bi ningje komya dine khasang komya dine jangshu semje dine jangshu semje simbi thone ane jimba da churin söba zönrü gi nyamlen je de odus nyamlen je de gyachewa lamni riba gyachewa chenam sa nyamlen je ore sa ti sungorwa.
And the trainings or teachings that are included within the category called vast will be those others that we have covered thus far, such as the cultivation of the determination, or the desire rather, for all beings to abide in lasting happiness, in other words, love, and for all beings to be freed of all forms of suffering, compassion, and developing the wholehearted resolve where one oneself takes responsibility for the welfare of others. That too is included within the vast teachings, as is the resulting mind of bodhicitta, the determination to become a Buddha for the sake of others, and the resulting bodhisattva practices, such as ethics and so forth. So these are included within the vast teachings, or the vast category, the teachings, the category of teachings called vast.
Atisha delia nyamlen je ge rimba salma sona rimba ro sungudwa denege dangbo ane nga jige dangbo ane jige ten jige shingi tula denege be shinle tenba duste tenjene nga jo karche warasne dangbo zawa shidile bezue jine nyamlen je wor e zawa dile nyamlen je wor side zawa se de nga jo kesin shubana shin de shidi garasne ne da jo ane nya ga wa duen chewa ane chiwa metabasame dene lende ane chike dikti poya da gewa tubya de bezo de gewa tubya de nane da dene ki tsurim sonya da soba deso bezo tangbo ho bezo nyamne ti che gores jisan di nyamne cheba ina ane tangbo ti che gor di bezo jine nyamne ya ko cha de dene samo ji dinge ji shin tubya da dongba yi do be shera komya ane dene jamni je chanshu semla so komya de ya odo sine bezo che gores ji sungor wa da rimbal ma sona.
And the way that one needs to train here is in accordance with the prescribed sequence. So this has been mentioned before, but to emphasize the importance, not just to blindly follow one's predisposition, one's interest, but rather train in the correct sequence in order to give rise to the desired results. One starts by relying on a spiritual teacher, and relying on the spiritual teacher means receiving teachings from your teacher and then cultivating, or as one receives them, cultivating them within. So one starts with receiving and cultivating the foundational teachings, which were presented as the 4 roots in the 14th verse. The recognition of this precious human rebirth that was so difficult to achieve, but has such great potential, yet is impermanent, and then the need to cultivate various virtuous qualities. So those are the 4 roots, the very foundation that we establish whilst relying on our spiritual teacher. With such a foundation established, we are then ready to train in the additional topics, developing the union of calm abiding and meditative insight, together with the wisdom realizing emptiness, as well as the various meditations that are required to generate bodhicitta itself. So here the key point to emphasize is a need to train under the care and guidance of a spiritual teacher, and training in the way that he is advising. This will be the correct sequence.
And it is not Yamlenji Rimbas Jungur, the Tangbo, Dene Yamleje, Deniba Dene Yamleje, Sisan, that Nangi Simuton, Yamlenji, Samukuata, and Yamlenji, Rimbade to Sinere, Sungurwa. That when is Timbarwa, Dangajuge, Jige Legaruchine, and Jige Goremchurwa, Penanga Jidangi, Lobsang Dorje, Chisogi, Lobjon, Samdana, Lobjon Chialia, Tangbo, Dijan, Iva Tisha said, Goremji Rimbaji Yodirwada. Rinpoche derwa mado lobsan di yakshor se di nyel jang se la ka ya marwa ko rinpoche jang ro ko le ga ro shin ne na khang bo swe ne dang bo rinpoche pa rinpoche dang bo di ji che ko rinpoche yong ko re je na dang ju ge ji ga re jang be ne lobjong ga re che be ne ne khang bo swe re le ga re an ji khala swe re an ji ji 저게 제모제 나가는데 지 장애게 림바지 고 당보 디자데 니바지 림바진 장고에도 자고마도 림바 매바기네 지 장애지 매로 강사 소소 섬을 강사 삼삼디 장치네 이야기 줘야 될 거라 하고 와 니나시 나도 나 섬리게 냠링 림바지 제 냠는 제바데 당보 림바지 당보 디자데 디자 냠는 제고라세데 림바시 용고를 제자디 림바 도스체는 삼다 냠는 제고를 림바지 순고래
Buddhism presents presents the 3 varying goals and presents a specific sequence to train one's mind in order to achieve them. So again, I want to emphasize this because if one just follows one's interest, one's disposition, one will not achieve one's desired goal. We have to train in accordance with the sequence that has been presented, because this sequence is based on knowledge and experience of the Buddha himself and all other great practitioners. And this approach of training or acting in a particular sequence is something in every aspect of society we do. If one has an interest in a particular subject and wants to become skilled in a topic and therefore is embarking on becoming educated in it, you don't start at the very end. You train in the correct sequence, going progressively through the varying stages of training in order to become skilled and proficient. Likewise, in your various work activities, you know that you have particular goals, but to achieve those goals, one needs to follow a particular sequence. And so too with construction. If one wants to build something with one's hands, you know that there is a particular sequence to engage in. Without doing so, things will not work out. And that those varying sequences haven't come about just because someone made them up, but they were based on knowledge and experience. So too with the training of our mind. So therefore I encourage you to not just follow your desires, but train in accordance with the sequence as presented by the Buddha.
당보 장도 강라 림바친 장고래서 다들 림바친 장찬의 제래 아니 그 직검제도 인지 당보네 림바나 제과시어 말하고 그 지야가 되고 고메 연구로 와대 그래서 딱다 차선에 당보 냠는 지도가 림바친 장고래 장찬의 되네 제마데 게디나 림바 제과시가요 말마 Venerable Lobsang Dorje Zendi Dangpo Ma Jang Zendi Chonga Changcha Wena Changcha ne dene Dangpo Changcha Kala Ma Chungchun ne Rinpoche Jama Chane Shingmarwa Jama ne da Jiko Changcha ne Rinpoche Changcha ne Nyamnyo Chasa ne Den Jama Jik Teplo Injimi Zendi Dangpo ne Lo Hwa Suyamarwa Dene Ko Tep Tobo Dikyo Lo Na Lo Tuya Chaigorwa Dene Nganzu ne Dina Shin Nganzu Dangpo Chaya de Nyamne Rinpa Tu Jang Dene Rinpa de Ko Jangdora Chasa ne Jama Nyamne Jedu Kabla Ko Kodu Koro Tingi Zen Komyada Dongpanyo Komyada Dene Nyamne Jeshan Digora Injimi Taji Chiwa Midaba Samtan de Goya Suyamara Horse Jangdor Jesarwa de Lama de Malandri, Tating a Pedro.
When in any aspect of life, but certainly here, when one follows the correct sequence and therefore trains oneself accordingly, becomes educated, then when one has followed the sequence, has become educated, one has freedom of choice in how one expresses themselves. So in this context, when one has established the foundational trainings, so the mind has been trained well in those four roots, then one has some freedom in terms of which direction one goes in terms of how one's further progression, which additional qualities to train in next.
Lamdren Nalaya Karsungorasa, Dambo Kibu Chunga Lamjirimba Lochang, then a Kibu Jinga Lamjirimba Lochang, then a Kibu Chimba Lamjirimba Lochang Kores and Lochang Handela and the Jirimba to Sunshairova. I did imagine that the Jawa the Jerim Songa de Lamrem Nalaya, Dambo Kibu Chunga the Tumo Lamjirimba Lochang, then a Kibu Jinga Tumo Lamjirimba Lochang, then a Kibu Chimba Lamjirimba Lochang Kores to say Sungorwa, this Songarwa, and did imagine San Yujim Dambone. Wajana Show Song Dambo Dungai call Samta, Dungai Hawa Chores, Di Chela and Dungai Yukunju de la Samta, Di Hawa Chores, Chesa Di Chela, Di Pangbane, Devukari Yungu, but the Hawa Chores, Di Hawa, and Di Devotoke, Tablam Carre said, the Lamdo Comore, said, Tushin Rimbaros, Chisanamji, Rimba, Samtan, I remember to Sunjarwa, Dinaji, Tiparedova that day. Dambo and Zawashili Bess and Betuchore City, Kibu Chunga the Tumo Lamirimbas. Then the subject gets a subject city dinner that Kibu Trina Tumo Lamirim Lochabala, Dameba Tomba, Dameba Locum Hurua, some the Hineta, Dameba Locum Yamna Genetin, Tarbatoko Winza, Kibu Trina Tumo Lamirim Lochaya. Then a Jachevi Chenam said, then Jamni Jajusem, and as we just some Persian to be Yamna Son, Jachevi Lamirim Locham Kore said, just not do in the Rimbajin Lochane, Yamna Jakore, said the Sunguadin.
I'm sure you're all very familiar with the way the Lamarim is presented. First, the trainings that are shared with practitioners of initial capacity are presented. And these are presented first because these are those very foundational trainings. And independence on training well in the practices that are shared with a practitioner of initial capacity, one has then the suitable foundation to engage in the second group of practices, the trainings which are shared with practitioners of intermediate capacity. And when one is trained well in that, one has the suitable foundation to train in the trainings which are shared with a practitioner, that are unique to a practitioner of great capacity. So we see there another illustration of the sequence of training. And likewise, when the Buddha gave his very first teaching in Varanasi, as mentioned yesterday, again, this was a specific sequence. He first taught that one needs to know suffering. One needs to recognize our situation we are in. Because when that is established, one is then ready to apply oneself to seek out the origin or the source of our suffering, the afflictions with ignorance at its root. Thereafter, we need to ascertain that cessation is possible, and then we are ready to have the strength of mind to strive to cultivate the paths within. So this is how we need to train. And this is referenced in this verse we're looking at, with in the second line, profound and vast teachings. So in the Lamrim, we have the foundational trainings, which were referenced in our 14th verse, and they are the trainings which are shared with the practitioner of initial capacity. These are followed by the trainings which are shared with the practitioner of intermediate capacity. These include the teachings on concentration and wisdom, coming to understand reality. So the profound teachings are shared with the practitioner of intermediate capacity. With such a foundation, one is ready to engage in the trainings which are unique to practitioners of supreme or great capacity, and these are the vast teachings. So what we see here is varying ways that a particular sequence is presented, and that is the order in which we need to train.
신의 주바이나 당원에 샘제집이 딩이진 빼마서 야고 쉬우지래 지상 당보 코로나다 되네게 지게 지와메다 와데 삼데 레가데 뒤수 마모 고할 뒤수 철라르샤 딜레 당보 코로나 신의 코로나 줍제 제집이 딩이진 줍 신의 줍샤바네데 샘 템보 제집이 딩이진 레용래 신의 줍 차외 제야는 냠는 제데 뒤수 삼단 남상하고 그래 선배게 삼로징아도 리리로 받아 제산디 용구를 가서 삼나나디 용시바래 되네게 용시기로와 아니 되네 지게 용구 여반에다 당보 신의 줍제 즉 디젤야 안지 약보 냠내치 투겐데다 디고르데디 깔레 하보 체월 뺀 당보 신의 줍나 신의 줍에 될래 추름기 냠내 매바데 신의 줍에 될 깔레 하보 체월이 제가 뒤에 근데 신의 줍 사회 제려야 다 sem지지비게 시다 되네 줍투고에는 sem지지비 딩이진 파 냠바샤시 뒤에시네 콜레레 된마도 디도라야 지금 롭장 제라 지기에나 맨나 따기로 또 봐봐 거지 거소수 수인의 디질 흘려제의 가부인자 흘려제되는 롭장시기 지기에나 맨나 따기 책으로 와 진짜 되네 인자 당보 코로나 가서 삼려 되네 코시기리데 디딱다 책이 매버리다 디 여바이나다 상이 송그레 상이인데나 상이 송나려 당보 신이 줍되네 지와메다 바다 안도수 냠는 제고래서야 돼 내가요 말았어 주나 상이 송나려 매래 내 공부루럽다 안에 로바 아야 대와다 안에 로바 상이 얘기하다 배는 나와줘봐다 로벨 레데제라서봐 내 파파 토메 공부루럽 다 반주 줍되니 주나려야 당보 신이 줍디 제려야 내 지금 대저된 제와다 안치와메다 와서메 레데 디봉기로 제고래서야 돼 어디니게 냠는디 림바디 균에 소요 말에 제름치기다 매기 라마 케바 데데네 날에 주미 데네 흉나다 낭외 흉날 패시 요 말다 데네게 매바래 제가 등한 삼다디 데네 삼시기리 디 따따 책이 매바래 여바 인다 관주기미 냠요지 냠렌지네 배직 심주지네 제바지다 데네 약보 중기는 아주 송구로 와데 송민도 와데 제가 등한 따따 책이 말 데네 삼로 데네 용바이나 신당보 신의 줍디는 냠렌디게 제일 지네 디그레 삼배 삼로데 따따 용매래 제자데 만주게 수름 야보 마송나 신의 줍 투야 하러 매바래 제자데 수름 신의 줍에게 맞아 시세디 수림송에 대한 세월다. 수림송에 자와르 마소나 당보 수림이하고 소 되는 신을 주고 그래서야지 송거래.
So here what I explicitly want to warn you against is possibly a common error or potentially common error, which when one hears about the great benefits of calm abiding and compares calm abiding or single-pointed concentration and compares what it would be like to have a mind of single-pointed concentration as opposed to our own very distracted state right now, one may give rise, because of inference one has, to a deep determination, I will achieve calm abiding first, because when a mind has powerful concentration, surely it will be very easy to then gain all the other realizations. So it must be the best route to not engage in the sequence that is presented in the text, but to start with calm abiding. And then when the mind is powerful and stable, then I can go back and I'll gain all the realizations very quickly. So such a way of thinking I can imagine arising for people. Because when one hears about the benefits of calm abiding, when you hear that you can meditate on any topic without distraction, This is very appealing for someone who wants to cultivate the mind to the Dharma. And when you hear that your mind is not tormented by afflictions like it is now, but rather one's, to retranslate calm abiding, it can be translated as your mind rests in peace. This sounds very appealing for us with our distracted, tormented minds. So then one can be drawn to that and think, when I have developed a mind that is at rest and peaceful, then I will have the capacity to quickly and easily develop all these good qualities that the text presents. So that would be a grave error, and it's not going to go well. Because if one were to do that, in essence one is saying, everything that that's a sequence that all the great masters has presented, I'm sure that's fine, but for others, not for me. I know better. And immediately there we see a fault. And the reason why it will not go well is firstly, calm abiding or single-pointed concentration requires as an indispensable foundation ethical restraint. And why is that? Because ethical restraint, when practiced to a relatively high degree, is where the mind is restrained from being influenced by the afflictions to a degree, to a large degree. That makes the achievement of calm abiding much easier. Without the mind being ethically restrained, it's following the afflictions. And therefore, to cultivate calm abiding is very difficult. And very difficult really is expressing as it's not going to come about. One will try, one will strive, but it will not be achieved. So therefore, and then a second reason why this is a mistake, to follow one's desire, to follow one's wish for calm abiding and not proceed in the correct sequence, is because should one then hear, as you've just heard now, ethics is the foundation upon which calm abiding is achieved, and one strives just to develop ethics so that one can develop calm abiding, one then may develop calm abiding. But it's very unlikely, not impossible, but very unlikely, one will develop any further qualities beyond that. Because the problems, the suffering, the difficulties that we experience that motivate us to want to transform our mind, those have been suppressed. Our mind is resting at peace. Again, this is an alternative way to translate calm abiding. Our mind is resting at peace. Our afflictions are all suppressed. Why then seek out the root cause of all our afflictions when our afflictions are suppressed? But this suppression is only temporary. So one then ends up achieving calm abiding, but not bothering going further because one's, to express it, one is blissed out. So therefore, I encourage you to take to heart what has been emphasized so by Lama Tsongkhapa here and train in the correct sequence. And what Lama Tsongkhapa here, the sequence that Lama Tsongkhapa has presented, is a sequence that every great Tibetan teacher presented. And all the great Tibetan teachers have presented the training of the mind in this sequence because all the great masters from India, the great pandas from Nalanda, such as Nagarjuna, Chandakirti, and so forth, all of them presented this sequence for training one's mind. And I don't imagine there is a single authentic Buddhist text which says this sequence is mistaken, rather go, for example, calm abiding first. So therefore I encourage you, especially if you've been training for a while, but your progress is limited, put effort into those foundational practices, establish those foundational practices, and then as we saw in the 15th verse, in the second line, then additional virtuous qualities easily grow.
Ahora dene zadang hanzuki deji nipa dila lam nyamne rimbati tusche gore songche. Da dene wadriya kaji dada lado langwa dang shanda molam yudu jede jegur de sedu. Cheza 세텔이야 소소에 냠는 강한 제투도 가시 다디 제투에 되제 제투에 되제 다데 아주 세텔이 냠는 제마도 봐 동반이 거에 동바도 바당 안지게 잠 이제 장주심 유고 냠는 제마도 봐 이나야 세텔이 제마도 왜네 샹다 몰람 유도체세 몽바나 메데니게 냠는 제투를 쇼어서 비 몰람 잡제 오래서 오래 카직 다다 라도 랑바산지 카시에 다데 냠내지 림바디 내가 자와시다 아니 다음에 그 소리 예 다음에 봐도 봐 지네 다음에 봐도 봐 디네 잠니 자주스미 람이리바 냠내 림바 송송아 카시에서 오래 마시나다 냠내 림바 망부지여로 봐 디나데 카시에 대시 냠내리 데네 직 다음에 봐도 베기 냠내야다 야 자주스미다 냠내 제마도 용구로 와 가시엘야 대시 저게 그 기부 중요한 람이리바데 냠내리지네 디네 기부 중요한 람이바 냠내 제마도 용구로 와 된다서 용구로 봐 되네 제가 말 냠는 제게 샴바디게시 오래 제들야 소수기 기부 중요한 람이리바 안지게 자와시 냠내 약보치 톱제 안지게 다음에 봐도 베시라라서 냠내 제 톱제 안 캬바침벨 람 냠내 제 투메 바이나 고가 말아봐 있나 샹다세죠다 샤카지 다다 라도랑 카시에 다다 냠는 주투바 세데라 냠는 제투바샤 카시에 세데라 냠는 제마투바 있나 안에 가르쳐고래라는 몰람 자고래서 샹다 냠는 제마투바 마오바당이 냠는 제투바 제긴 제투바 용어 쇼스베기 되는게 몰람 접제도시네 몰람 유도 제예서 근데 다들 저기 기부 중요한 일은 받아 치워미다 받아 되는게 기본 그룹제 되네 다음에 또 베셔라라서 받아 되는게 즉 다음에 또 베셔라 게마투바 있나 신의 게마투바 다음에 또 베셔라 게마투바 있나 가셔 그래 되네 아데키 두고 민노세 샤샤 말와 제가 마홍바나디 냠는 제투바 제투바 용어 쇼스베 되네 몰람 접제 아니 마홍바나 냠는 지긴세 돈이 둔바샤 되네 몰람 자고래서 디나시 세델리아가 저기 기부 중요한 일인 바다 다음에 또 베셔라 냠는 제투바이나 세델리아다 장주심 규례 기에제 파진주기 냠는 제마두바이나 대수 가르치게 해서는 마오바낭에 되네 냠는 제투버 쇼스베게 몰람자고 해서 왔다 현다 세림 냠는 림바디게 소소 다들 세델라 냠는 제투바 용거래 마투바 릭지 용거래서 세대 제투바데 약보로 받아 제투바래 마투바데 다 마음반에 되니게 냠는 제투버 디 냠는 제기 제투버 용어 쇼서 베고 몰람 잡제 두스네 듬바게 오래서 그러다 샹다 몰람 유도 지gur 돼서 돼
Just change the translation of this third and fourth line because it doesn't refer to people but practices. So the third and fourth line can be translated, should be translated like this. From now, put those that you can into practice. And then the fourth line, and make prayers for those that you cannot yet. So I'll read it again. From now, put those that you can into practice and make prayers for those that you cannot yet. So this then is referring to from now, put those that you can into practice. This refers to start where you are. Start with those 4 practices that have been mentioned, starting with precious human rebirth. This is where you are. Start here. And for those that you are not yet ready to put into practice, because those foundational trainings are not yet established, make prayers that you can. So, for example, for practices such as calm abiding, wisdom realizing, emptiness, bodhicitta, don't just ignore those. Receive teachings on them, reflect on them, but make prayers that one will come to realize them, if not in this life, then in future lives. But put your primary focus in your reflections, in your meditations, on those that you can put into practice now. In other words, those foundational trainings. So again, these 2 lines. From now, put those that you can into practice and make prayers for those that I cannot yet.
Dedan Givi Tempa, Yonzopa, Lamdo Sewa Shena, KB Pul, Shendu Tamchupon, Konar says.
And that brings us then to the 18th verse. Not ever abandoning any of the Buddha's skillful methods is the way the teachings of the conqueror are fully perfected. Your skill will grow if you understand the path well, otherwise the sacred Dharma will just be abandoned and lost.
Nadelia Dambo Gunja Sangi Tapse, the Chigia Mipon, Gunja Sangi Tapse, that I'm going to give you Lamyirimbe Yamlenchia Jorwa, and Dina the Kibu Dingil Yamlenchirimba, and Kibu Chimela Mirimba. Tizu Yamlenrimba Chazan that so Dorduna Chazan Sangi Gobantoy, Tablam race or Tabres, Tabres. Dina she dang to get that give Chumela Mir Tisha. The men began to dinner sometime to get doing Yamlenchia, Nagan Yamlenchia. Tesoda, Niga, that doing Yamlenchia the Guinea, Sangi go on to be tabre, Nagan Yamlenchia, Sangi go to be tabre. Dina she to get that Chilugul Mason that baby Casso Gayurta, Casso Nimi Cheta, then a Gayurta, then Sajata and Giluba, the Niki Chulu Shiton and Yamlan Chevati, the Suchasina, Sanji Gomor to be a tablam, the Yamlan, but Sanji Gomor to be a tab. Dina she has to give Tessin Big, that Chuyu Yamlan Cheata, and that's a Bali Chuyu Yamlan Cheata, Sanskrit Chuyu Yamlan Chet, Chesa, Yamlan much as Sanji to be a tablet. Gunja Sanji taps, Sanji go on top to be tablamless or tablamless. They're not Chigan Mibon, said tablamre. Chesa, Deso Chasa, or the Chigan Mibon Ladu, Nanzuke, Diungura the Bene, or Danga Tabachimichu and Yamle, Tabamibichu and Yamle Chogo Mar Panto, your Mares and Odu Shire Mares, or Danga Kibu Chimbe Lam Yan Rimbaji, Kibu Chumi Lam Yamlin Batting a Jango Mares and the Niki Poyada. The Anji Kashiga, or Danga Yamle Jebare, Jekin Yingan Akbai, Chisan Dochol and Yamle Jogo Mares, Pando Yomares and Dushine Saya. Kashiga, not doing Yamle Jed, said then the Yomares, the Yamle Jogo Makoyamas and Poya Dinungurua. Dina Shida. On I Gilupe, and I knew me sure that isn't Tawoma Yamle Jogo Jogo Mares. I knew me sure and I Gilupa, the Sayat Tawo Mares, the Niki Chigio Mares, Chiga Mipons, that the Mipons at the Niki Chigio Mares, Chasa Sangi, Yamlin Sanjo go on to be tablam re, Chasa Dizu Chasa, so in Yamlin Chetu, the Jeho. J. Madubina, the suit Yahoo Marco, Maras and Pa, Junji, the Papon, your Meva, your Marisol. She's an email to Chigium, this is what the Guay, my more Tonjon Dangura, the Guay, Marangas Pan, she said this is what. I tell what you may choose, Temich, and Yamlio Guay, Maris. Then I tell me to Tapachim, your Maraguay, Maris. Not doing your Nachu, the Omar Guay, this is Bungus, and never, Tonjon Meva, Bung said the part, but young Bashagra, Dinichio, my Chasa Sangi, you to be a tablet. So, Yamlin J. Tuna Jehore, J. Matubina, Delia, Katan, Pap, Kichi, Bonje, the Junji my lesson word.
So looking at the first line then, not ever abandoning any of the Buddha's skillful methods. So the Buddha's skillful methods, so the Buddha being a perfected being, he was able to present a wide variety of skillful methods. So we are not to abandon any of them. So for example, the skillful methods are of the trainings which are shared with the practitioner of initial capacity, the skillful methods which are the trainings which are shared with the practitioner of intermediate capacity, and the skillful methods from the Buddha that are trainings unique to practitioners of supreme capacity. So none of these are to be abandoned. Rather, which means that we should relate to them, we should have the attitude towards them. The Buddha taught all of these, and he taught them for specific purpose. So in relation to that way of dividing the Buddha's path, it's quite clear already from what's been presented, this all needs to be trained in. Similarly, though, with the teachings of Sutra and Tantra, One shouldn't abandon either, which means having the attitude of abandoning one and only seeing the other as important. Rather, we should understand the Buddha taught both, because both are needed, and therefore are expressions of the Buddha's skillful means. And perhaps even more relevant would be to ensure that we abandon an attitude of arrogance towards other schools of Buddhism. So, for example, within Tibetan Buddhism, there are 4 primary schools. We should relate to all 4 as being various skillful means presented by the Buddha, and not view any one as superior to another, or have an attitude of, for example, I am a Geluk, and therefore these other, what's presented in the Nyingma or Sakya or Kakyu, I can deprecate or have a negative attitude of that tradition, or of their teachings within there, or their presentation, or their practitioners. That kind of attitude needs to be abandoned. Similarly, if one looks at the presentation, the teachings found within either the Pali or Sanskrit tradition, and looks down on either, saying, this is not really the teachings from the Buddha, that is an error. One should understand that these are all part of the skillful means presented by the Buddha. And therefore, for ourselves, as Mahayanists, we should ensure we do not have a negative attitude towards the teachings found within the Theravada tradition or their practitioners, but rather understand that this is all part of skillful means as presented by the Buddha. And in this way, we do not abandon any of the Buddha's skillful methods.
Deda dedar jewe temba yonzo la lamdo sewa shena kebi pulu side chesa denigi nyamle rimba de chasam sanji gobon tobi chirdu nyamle rimba jewe temba yonzo zoba chasang ya sosugi lamdo sewa sheba side denigi nyamle rimba de sosugi jeje nyamlen je jeje sewa side jeje ba nyasa cheba so Jala Dakota, but the Zachim Shures and Anzuki, Dabuja Joroba, this Seva says Sigura. Chesan Denigi, that Denigi Yamling Rimbajo, Chesan, this Sanji go on to be Tabreta, Yamlenje, Abore, Sosugis, and some of the Sosugi and Yamlenje. The Sosugi Penem, Sosu Chulu, Karajimin, Penekilupa, Sosu Yamlenja, Giluba, Giluba, Yamlenje, Denij, Shandagi. Chulu Shandagi Pa to Lobsang Dorje, Teslia Somba to Senesin, Desugi Tone, Sosugi Yamle Rimba, Sosolia, Pando, Nembaja Yungores, Wada, Nemba, Chesadene, Sosugitini, Dina, Sonship, Yamle Rimba, Sosolia, and Sosulia Yamle Chevan, Yamle Nyarsa Chevaina, the Cabaret or Cabana, say Shena, Caba Puluchua, Cabi use, Cabi Puls in the Caban and Bay Awores or the Caba Puluchua, Rangi Yamling Rimba, Nishan. Chugino Sonjebe Nyamle Rimbati Chasan, Dina de Pando Yote, Sosolia, Nyamle de Jaya Yobat, Nyamle Jaya Yobat, Jire, and Dimembegata, Sosugi, Michelia, come down Meba, Dushigi, Desolia, Sonyalia, and Kochike, Pando Yobat, Chasan, Dizi, Chasanda, Dizu Chasan, Dembelia, Caso, Nyamle Rimbati, Dana Janso, Danang, Yakuresha, that is Chasan, Sanji Yoko want to be a tablam resha, Chasan. Gansada, come down, Mebata, Dini Sosolia, Dini Sunshebegim, Yamling Jimba Jesha, Tisan, you go on to be a tablam race and beg Delia and Gushep chair, now Guzi chair, Denigi Jena, Sosugi Delia, Jigga Sosugeta, Duseta, Sosugi, Nube Joba, Desolia, Lobsang Dorje, Yamlenje, Dusine Jebaina, and Sosu Jig Cabana Neda, Capapulus, but the Yawachago, as a Capapulus said.
The second and third line. Let's read the first 3 together. Not ever abandoning any of the Buddha's skillful methods is the way the teachings of the conqueror are fully perfected. Your skill will grow if you understand the path well. So by having an open attitude, a respectful attitude towards all of the Buddha's teachings and the varying ways that they are categorized and presented. So, for example, between the Theravada and the Mahayana, the different schools of Tibetan Buddhism and so forth, by having a genuine and sincere respect for all of these varying categorizations or presentations, then this is the way that the teachings of the conqueror will be fully perfected, which means that, and your skill will grow by understanding the path well. So what this means is, even though one is encouraged to train primarily or even solely in a single tradition, if one does train well in that tradition, you will not only understand that tradition well, but you'll give rise to the qualities of the teachings of the Buddha within. And through that, you will come to value the other traditions too. You'll see them as beneficial. You yourself will be open and receptive to them. Even if you yourself do not engage with them, you will still have a sincere respect and appreciation towards them, seeing them as equally valid and skillful means coming from the Buddha himself. So this kind of attitude is generated or cultivated, comes about within someone who trains well in the correct sequence as is presented, because they will be giving rise to the qualities of the Buddha's teachings. They will have a deep respect for the Buddha's teachings, even where the manner of presentation, the tradition and so forth, differs. And therefore, the teachings of the conqueror will be fully perfected. In other words, they won't be deprecated or devalued.
Damchu Shendu Pongwa Kona se Shendu Damchu Pongwa Kona se Sesan Desolia Lobjong Gune Maje Baje Chulu Shandagi de Copen Chu Sonshige de Lobjong Gune Lobjong Je Debazina Dinanda Karakara Sunguba Karakara Lam Nyamling Rimba Temba Chaza Hago to Wajiza Jenny Delia Gune Denege Lobjong Gune Maje Soso Rang the Insime Shango Chibu Jeje Delia Yako Mala di Beduja di Chigyo Marasepa Chevana Denishevane Damchu Pongwas and Chubongli Sasagmado, the Conare Chubong Le Jibu Sayamada Shank Hagosho Pando Yomares or that Chizan Damchu Shandu Damchu Pong Conar says, Sosugi Di Tola Lobjong Majevache, Gayan Yu Mevajilia, Adi Yago Mara Di Chigyo Mara Seshapan, Chubongli site, Chubongvigi, that Dipasa Sagores. Mado Shankaya Marachizan Dinig, Sosu Digi Niel Shabana, Sosu Shunti Pata, Lobjong Che, to Cheven, Dina de Shuntelia, Sanji YouTube, Tablam Karakara, soon your body, Nanzugi, how to put it as the Sungore.
The fourth line in the 18th verse, otherwise the sacred Dharma will just be abandoned and lost. So this is the grave fault that may well befall a practitioner who does not train their mind well. They may end up abandoning the Dharma, and for them the Dharma becomes lost. Because if they may have received many teachings, but if they haven't cultivated those within themselves, they may well end up with a biased attitude, thinking their tradition or their presentation is superior to others, and then end up criticizing other Buddhist traditions. And in this way, they end up abandoning the Dharma. Whereas if, on the other hand, as in the lines previous to the fourth line, if one does train well, one will come to, the Dharma will arise within oneself. One will experience the benefits of the teachings of the Buddha, and thereby will have sincere respect for all the skillful means of the Buddha, even where those presentations on a superficial level seem to differ from what you yourself have trained in. Because you have cultivated the Dharma within, you'll understand that this, what could appear as a difference, is just a different presentation from the Buddha, but underlying it, there is no difference.
Dene, Dene, that Yaramchi Sungor Gidina, that Yaramchi Galop to one night, and also Chuluk said the Tunja Kuguri, said the Yaramchi Bezu to one and Gorda, Chuluk Tunja Zuelia, the Chuluk Tunu Kuguris. The Garrison, Chuluk Tunja Manana, 지기 최루의 톤에 안직 지기지래 막아와신 투보자 답에 지 룸바나가서 zemli nala kanga shu chigor cheza zemli shidele nugores chezada chulu sede tunde chabaina 직 tunde yago chubaina dene mima de jijilya 지게 kanga matebati yago ngore chezanga zemli shidele ala pengere cheza chulu tunde gugor esede cheza yarum chege cheza 도시네 난거 cheza dinza yarum je ande 지게 같이 나가나를 폐지나 가지게 샤모고야 예수 나가나를 폐지 예수게 샤모고야 아니지 힌두게 나가나를 폐지 힌두게 dit마 샤모고야 아니 두시네 안지게 that's 사야 그 니마 리수마시비게 최루도 냠제나 델야 안지 샤모고야라서 봐도신 또 지게 최라서 대신 배 여름지게 최루 튼주에 털어야 쇼지 두스는 거래 제가 출루 튼제면 나가서 미망보지 출루 소소라는 제수자가 미망보 휴주어래 맨에 가서 낭보 약보 예수 약보 말해서 변제 제반 예수 제수자 미망보요 디세가 가고요 제가 뒤면 봐자 이 나제 가시리 안 되리 지사등아도 출루 되게 튼제 고그래서 튼제 약보지 출루 가르 제담에 소소라마레스 제가 소소라마 돈에 출루지 냠len제 소소 가르치 출루지 현출이야 무집지 얼마도 될야 카다지 즉 독자래라네 되네 뇌야기마도 판도가야 말이지 구십레스 코로나랑 냠는 마치나 콘솔 핑거로 코로나 냠는 디기 핑거 약보로 와서 90지 그랬지 출루 차상라 90지네 튼제 지고래서 튼제 양아도 출루 차상라 90지 그래서 난 여름지기 출루 차상을 90지에 두신에 가져갈 두신 난거 제가 되네기 안에 라신 방법 좀 여름지기다 제 출루 그 라신 차상수 공전 마 총주 줘야라서 봐 저들 제야라서 봐 두신 튼제선도 두신 여름지 배직 zemli 시대용 연구도 디 시대용 알아 출루디도 튼제고도 제가 출루 튼제 잡아라 출루 소소 가르치기 냠는 제배나 출루 현달에 90지 고리 90지 고리에서 어두스 송거다
What Lama Tsongkhapa has written here is entirely in accordance with what His Holiness often encourages for ourselves, but for all people in our world. So this advice that was relevant many centuries ago remains relevant today. So one of the key activities of His Holiness is to promote religious harmony, and religious harmony both between religions as well as within religions. So in other words, between various Buddhist denominations. So His Holiness emphasizes the importance that there is religious harmony, again, between religions and between religious denominations. Because where there is a violent disagreement in particular, not only is peace and harmony destroyed, but the reputation of religions is gravely harmed, and therefore their potential to bring benefit is greatly harmed. And His Holiness doesn't just say this, but he shows a very clear example of respecting other religions. And the reason why he encourages us to respect other religions is that, and again, religions and different forms of Buddhism as well as different religions. The reason why he encourages us to respect them all is because all have good qualities. So even where other religions have starkly different views on many aspects, starkly different views from that of the Buddha on many different points, still those religions have many good qualities and bring benefit to suffering mother beings. Therefore, we should respect those good qualities, and moreover, criticizing, looking down on them and so forth, from that no benefit comes. And we see through His Holiness's behavior, he acts in accordance with this. When he visits, as he regularly has done, temples of various religions, he will often act visually in accordance with the various customs and traditions of that religion, wearing different hats and so forth. And we see this when he appears in different religious contexts. He will happily act in accordance with those religions. Why? To show respect. And moreover, he's arranged many conferences with religious leaders from various religions, as well as different Buddhist denominations, again, to look at the areas that we have in common and to show respect to others. In this way, to actually, through his endeavors, promote religious harmony. So therefore we should take this too as inspiration, not to have attitudes of division or derision.
지상 출루 차상게 샤모도 최근에 발생 겨울치마도 유기 말에 지상 라마 제 소소라라게 추기이나래 자실라마 자심어떻게 소소라라기미 제 출루게 샤모데 고마도 출루 샤나게 샤모고에도 발생 제 제가 통하면도 지상 겨울치 출루 차상게 샤모 쉬는 비거래 지상 비거래 당에 나랑기 디 나랑게 삼로 나려야 겨울 두스나교디 지게 두스나교디 소수게 삼는다도 이 삼도 가르고 거라서네 여름치기 나주기 최 냠는 제디 나주 삼로 나로 냠는 제마도 치 두로기 디기 냠는 말에서 지선 치 두로야 베네 가르고베네 베네 카치기 샤모치 고베네 카치 차고야 말에 예수기 샤모치 고베 예수 차고야 말 지다 낭비 샤모치나 나버 차고야 말 님이 샤모고네 님마 차고야 말에서 지선 디네자 사자다 그 유샤마 갈고 있으나 둘로디기 저기 철로데다 디레세디 딱다 책 말했어 어디 책 말했어 제사당 안도 철로 가른 냠네 지금 소수게 낭 삼로라 가른 냠네 지금 디 제고르마도 둘로야 켜발 가요 말했어 데 제디 데니시그 겸치게다 순구어를 여바딩이 나랑에 삼존다네 디고고르다 디고고르바다 디레레도 왔다가 둘로디 건바네 고베네 저 마미 많이 받아 지키테 년도 많이 받지 디니게 둘로 중요해지 건 조셔베네고 년도 말로 와고 그 둘로디 년도 받다는 아주 어디 년도 받나 통고라고 둘로다 차사 예리 버 맞아 년도 말로 와고 그러와 디나시 지게 최가야 마시바 냠네 가야 메한 지게 지게 둘로도 낭비 둘로도 지부 쉬우지 고연지 쉬어되나 냠네 둘로 파단 때문에 배 지지대 때문에 배하고를 통고한테 이내 나 삼로게 토네 냠렬로 좀 가면 직 낭배 추기 냠렬 제다다 지마신배는 낭바차스가요 말와 어제다 디네자 여름 지기디 두슈 자상 아주 둘로래 켜봐 가야마다 냠렬 제 쪼어도 낭삼리 토네 냠렬 제고고래 해서지 나 니뜬고래 해서 배딩이 디고고를 당하는
You may know better than me, but I think His Holiness is the only religious leader who does this. I personally haven't seen any other religious leaders who wear the garments of other religions, or in particular hats of other religions, or even within our Tibetan Buddhist world. I don't know of any other lamas who wear hats of the Buddhist tradition other than their own. So I think His Holiness really is unique in this. And my further personal take on why he does this is His Holiness is showing again that the meaning of Buddhist practice is training your mind. What hat you wear or do not wear is not of particular importance. If he wears a Jewish yarmulke or whatever the hats are called that some Christians or some Muslims wear, this doesn't make him a member of that religion. And similarly, if in accordance with a particular puja, he's wearing a hat from the Geluk or the Nyingma or the Sakya or the Kakyu, it's of no great importance. What is of importance is that he's showing respect. And similarly, we can understand that for any of ourselves, if we buy on the internet a police officer's uniform and we wear that around town, this doesn't mean we suddenly have the authority of a police officer. So His Holiness, through this behavior, in a light-hearted manner, he shows respect to various religious traditions, and in particular to the views that are in accordance with Buddhism and to their practitioners. And we should really take to heart this understanding that merely wearing the clothes of a tradition, including of Buddhism, does not necessarily make one a Buddhist. One needs to cultivate those qualities within.
인자다 젊지기 조로시 젊지 제버친레 판도 방고는 거를 이나디나 조로 시요래 지사 점블링리아 밀리아 잠제배야 잠제 냠렌드 파 배야디 젊지기 다 조로시는 거래 디는 거래 지라 아니 다디 숨바다진 점리 나래 추루 차서 튼데 제야디 디나 튼데 나야디 디베서 디 조신한 거래 지를 가르는 거라서는 아 저기 추루라 메딘비게 상주에 냠는 제야디 추루라 마덴바 베네 덴지게 남자 신야다 냠는 제야 저러봐 덴지게 남자 데네 지게 거소를 따위고 제바체 동반이고 담 제바체다 제 잠니 주간에 인지미 쳐바체고 말해서 그러다 진짜 철을 마딘베 상주에서 진짜 인지미주 내주 냠는 제발라 잠니제 냠는 제발 인지미주 쳐바치 거 제고요 말해서 진짜 이 냠는 제 라렌다에 인지미주 쳐바인고 말 덴진 저와 지지 중전 삼다 제바체 인지미주 쳐바체고 말해 쳐바 마제베는 이 냠는 진짜 디고를 진짜 맞아 냠는 제 쳐야래서 진짜 디네상 잠니지데 아주게 최루다 예바다 매바다 눈돌아 여러서 보고라 잠바 제와 여러봐 제사 인지미 잠님이 냠는 제야당 파직제 제야다 덴진 저와 중요 삼다 인지미 쳐바고야 쳐바치고 말해서 니토네 하는 아주 냠는 제초를 봐 냠는 제고 최고를 해서 데니기 진바직 최루를 맞으면 상주게 냠는서 숨바제 다 찍대 나 여름치기 뭐기 된다세야 뭐 왜 예미 와려로와 제상 왜 다들 잔조 잡조 요한테 왜 니가 별이간 차상 시제 냠좀 명제 디기 용하게 베스식제 디시디 겨름치기 지난 제버틀 빼 야치만 난거 때 디난 조시 담자 시소네 디시그리 제상 점례래 잠제 빼게 냠르 잠제 빼 냠르 출루 튼제 안에 가소래 출루래 메티베 상주 냠는지야 안에 왜 베게 된다세야 어디시디 다 겨름치기 공부하는 거做西西我都是能过的베기 된다세야 네 말에 다들 베바 저상 갑줄래요 뭐 저상 겨름지 가서는 뭐디 지가 거의 소속이 안에 직중당 안에 소속이 최다 직중 차상 송교에 봐 베다미 저상 염도 요 고고를 선거로 와니 저상 디라바는 뭘 지기도 식으로 와 진짜
And in the four primary activities that His Holiness focuses on, this is one of them, promoting harmony between various religious traditions. And accompanying this, another focus is to try and develop the situation of world peace. And a third focus of his is that of universal value, or maybe universal ethics, where he's presenting a Buddhist doctrine without the confines of a religious presentation. So teaching dependent arising, love, compassion, and how to cultivate these minds within the mind, understanding dependent arising, cultivate the mind of love, cultivate the mind of compassion to those who are not Buddhists, and as well as to those who do not follow any religion.
최킬링과 말해줘.
네네.
메들와다 남버 좀 많이 봐.
네네. 니디 라페. 건서 남버 메켄 당 철록켈린 마체. So teaching this Buddhist doctrine, but without the confines of a religious presentation. So to both those who are either not Buddhist or who do not accept a religion at all. And then that's the third, and then the fourth is preserving Tibetan culture, which is so threatened. So these are His Holiness's four primary activities, which link very closely to what Lama Tsongkhapa has written here.
저기 Geshe Thubten Rabten 남북에서 천리기 토네 근데 지금 롭션 지역으로 해서 천리기 롭션 주제 장고서 차고래 대양 가르에서는 나 저기 진년마디와네 최지gen 저기 천리잖아 최를 여기에서 비게 삼로스 용고르와 천리 장한 저기 어디 최세야디 지 먹어야 돼서 삼로 용고르와 제가 되네게 인자 여름 지기 갈송 거로서는 직 롭종 그런 맞아봐치 직 약보 말씀인데 디고 말 당보 롭종 제다 심주제 제사디 낭비게다 직 최냠네 제가 저기 천리호 롭종 제바네 천리교 조다되는 의인의 수되게 하고에도 디만 저기 낭비게 최냠네 제 평균을 판도 제 연구를 했어. 근데 디마제다 천리배되게 아니 아직 최대 약고 말해야지 그냥 하면 자데 아주게 천리기 돈을 롭정제 천리의 튠비기 최기 내수되게 그 판도 여바디 파 천리벌에 시대 편준이가 판도 요야다 제가 되는게 천리비기 최 약고 말해서 뽕야다 최비기 천리세의 약고 말 뽕야디 매마 차기래서 제가 되는게 된다는 아주 롭정제 의원이수도 하고요도 되는 강한데 책임 말해서 되는상 저기 이게 천리기 돈에 냠네 롭정 지고래서 해야지 도시는 롭정 여름식 도시의 공부 시제 롭정 도시 롭정 능고로 와.
A further key activity of His Holiness has been initially creating a connection between the world of Tibetan Buddhism and that of modern science. And not only was this after this connection was established, he took it much further and has encouraged, and now it's mandated throughout the monasteries and nunneries for science to be studied, modern science to be studied. And the reason His Holiness brought about this initiative was to counter the mistaken view that perhaps scientific knowledge can harm religion. His Holiness said, that's nonsense. How can you say that without studying the scientific view? Something has to be studied and understood before you can either validly criticize it or not. So when science then was studied and known, and there was a lot of contact, it became very clear that there was mutual benefits between these two, the interaction of these two communities. And this was part of His Holiness's, maybe you could say, modernization program, where he wanted to encourage the recent refugees to abandon modernity, not to abandon modernity, but to rather embrace where modernity can be beneficial, and in particular where there is mutual benefits or benefit to others, such as to the world of science with the introduction of studies on consciousness and so forth. So therefore, an additional primary activity of His Holiness is first creating and now strengthening the connection between science and Buddhism.
지산디 맞에 당한 주게 녀마 벌레네 천이도 전에 롭정 지게 최고短大了 파 삼당 롭정 지게 뉴뉴 대숨기 천백이다 제 뜻실로 말아서 받는 뉴뉴로와 제사 다 되네자다 결혼 지게 되 치수 자하나 받은 출루 그 공부 용수도 벌려야 롭정 천이 빼지다게 되 롭정 제고그래서 제사 롭정 제나 근데 냠랭이 림바 가래가를 좋다 차상 신기래서 마제반에 신 말에 제대 제고그래서 언제는 누스네 갈롭나제 대사 다지게 지게 베비기 나나도 주라서 받는게 최로 가화연의 차상이야 챙이대도 롭정제도 롭정지고래 롭지지고 녀마 벌레네 된시라 요 말에 제나대 여름 지게도 신네 롭정 마제네 신기 말에서 가르가르요 제도 롭정 제고래 롭정 제바에는 누스네 신기래서 되는게 롭정제 내 롭정제다 대상 롭정제네 되네 그 베네 사자 그유 녀마 아니 길로 네 계시 말아서 차상 님도 좀 전에 이제 그냥 철로 졸랭 해야 돼. 디 졸랭제도 언주도 수삼다나 되네 냠는제 되네 파지도 안 차상게 니 좀 규율을 차지는 직질을 가마다 와야고 용도. 진짜 되네 이제는 야음치기도 전에 가난데 다 대상 그지게 부인 나dengi 공부 용수 소바 가 여배네 다시 천일로 좀 해봐 유님해 봐래. 제가 벌레 녀만에 아니랴 유치기게 매래 제가 여름주도 스칼로 나는 따고 빼지 따고서 따는데 아니 공부나는 빼지 따는 데니 대상 계시 맡아야 돼 도시네 직시우 주도 제가 차상 여름지기도 도시네 배 직제버 친례 판도 되네기 이제 안디 멤버게다 안디 잡아서 멤버 안디 지게 랍라나라네 미기아나라네 챙이다야 빼지 따야 돼 소시네 다 지 지게 도시네 존대여래.
In Old Tibet, there was a deep-seated resistance to modernity, and certainly scientific knowledge was largely unknown in Old Tibet. There was almost no one who had been exposed to scientific knowledge, and so therefore you could say there was probably no interest in it because it was largely unknown. So through His Holiness's wisdom, his authority and position and the respect that he's held in, he's completely changed the situation. So he's led his people to really counteract any potential of arrogance that comes from ignorance, but rather encourage them to understand what previously one has not known about. And now throughout all places of Buddhist study or Tibetan Buddhist study, science is also studied. And we see this very visibly with regular discussions that are held, which His Holiness often attends, between eminent scientists and scholars of all 4 Tibetan schools. So all 4 Tibetan schools, under the guidance of His Holiness, also study science, modern science. So this situation has radically changed, and I don't think there is a single a place of Tibetan Buddhist study where science is not also studied, certainly mandated in the great monasteries of the Gelug tradition. And not only has His Holiness brought about this radical change to Tibetan Buddhism since it's gone into exile, but the situation of nuns has been radically changed. And they have a full education for the first time ever, with the first Geshe graduating more than a decade ago. So this is also a radical change. And moreover, the Buddhist knowledge is no longer confined to the Tibetan monastic institutions, but in Tibetan schools it has now long been studied, again at the insistence of His Holiness. So the change in terms of science being introduced, the change of nuns becoming educated, the change of the lay community from the school children from the young age, the change in their education of including that of actual Buddhist study where Buddhist texts are studied. This was all introduced by His Holiness, and in fact even villagers, those who fled as adults and were never able to go to school, they too have access to Buddhist teachings. So these are all illustrations of radical change that His Holiness has brought into the world, into the Buddhist world, since it's emerged from Tibet into exile. Lama Tsongkhapa continues in the 19th verse. So I think this is a retranslation on the board. In brief, do not let your thoughts follow your desires. Rather, direct your mind toward the Buddha's teachings. At the time of encountering temporary problems, recall the benefits of practice, and with humility exert yourself as if you were striving for treasure.
Rangi samba gangkala matang sidu susuge samba oda dijine yasare sambege dine samlu nashin mache bache gewe chebi ondo tansne sanyi yima lam nyamne rimba sungsha bade rimba nashin sumba nashin jine nyamne jegori esora deshin ante chuba najire dabo shine eruptine nyamne jine jona degree sa dine samla membache susuge samla di yasare sambe membache sanyi gi sungsha be nyamne rimba dangbo dija niba dija sumba dija dus nyamne rimba sungsha yore di nashin jine jangori esaje dona rangi samba gangala madang 지마가 랑게 사바나지 강한 삼사데 마지스 아니 간데 제거스는 예외 제비 원도 땅스는 예외게 자와상 얘기 된데는 냠네 제거스 바드마 손샤바 디나신 제거를 해서시.
Looking at the first 2 lines, in brief, do not let your thoughts follow your desires. Rather, direct your mind toward the Buddha's teachings. So here, there's do not let your thoughts follow your desires. This refers to having met the Dharma, having interest in the Dharma. Your own karmic predispositions may well encourage you to train in a particular topic because you feel more inclined to that, for example, calm abiding. Don't make that mistake, as I have described before. Rather, direct your mind towards the Buddha's teachings, meaning train your mind in the correct sequence, the sequence that the Buddha and all the accomplished masters taught in. This is what works. Don't just follow your desires, your interests, your likes. Rather, subdue your mind, and train in accordance with the guidance from your spiritual teachers.
This is Chadu Tuya Penya La Guberchi, Delta Separation, Jeza, the Nigging Semgi Tone, and Yamlin Chibi Gablia, Ganga Tigres, Ganga Negab Ganga Yungres, the Nigga Ganga Chadus, the Nigga Negablia, Ganga Yudu Gabla, and the Garchoras, Tanga to Ganga Yudu, or the Ganga to Daddy to some Maresha Ushag in Yayorwa. The dinners at the Ganga Chair do Karsam Tangers, Digi Yamlin Cheban, and D. Jebu Pendelia. And the Jebu didn't soon go as a big Jebu delia, some downward, spending on the Chudum Sona, Ganga do Sambana, the Chudum Sunalia, Ganga Yoba, sometimes Chudum in Jebu, Gewachimal, had amigo, what the Tendele, the Yudu, but Denis Jebu de la Samtadu, the Nigan, Ganga delia, and check Ganga series or just a Jundri Yamne Mutis Yamne Ligres. Just Deneza, painted sometimes Jebu de la Samta, Delia, a bear who does some good shape. And dinner and the order didn't Yamlin Jera, but bear Yakures, dear Ravanashi, dear Dang. Serba said to the Serba and the Tikpa said me, Tishabas Gogore. Tisan Delia Serba said, and Numbun Pigeon and the Jundri Mebar was a Jundri Serba said Menashi. She the Jundri Menashi Bawa said, Bear Jundri Shege, didn't Yamlin said, Bear Yabur Cock shoes, Razzle, some big, the Chichu Yamlin Bear Horse and big sometime, Denny. Jebu didn't you about the bear horse and begin. Didn't you go across the dear near Banaj, Kabush, Cheche, Delian, Zundushin, Panamne or yes, Lucine, Smart. They say, Chadu to ya, Payla, Guber, the Delta Sabashins.
The last two lines in the 19th verse. At the time of encountering temporary problems, recall the benefits of practice, and with humility, exert yourself as if you are striving for treasure. We know life is full of problems and difficulties, and they do not go away just because we've met the Dharma. They do not go away just because we're trying to cultivate the Dharma within. Even in a peaceful environment like this, we experience obstacles. There may be outer, there certainly will be inner. So when these are experienced, do not give up. Firstly, accept that obstacles, both inner and outer, will be encountered. That's okay. Do not give up. Rather, recall the benefits of practice and use that then as inspiration. So, for example, training in ethical restraint, restraining your mind from following the afflictions. This is difficult. But when the mind is once again following the afflictions, when it's once again difficult to restrain oneself ethically, don't give up. Do not see it as beyond you. Rather, recall the benefits of developing an ethical outlook. For example, a good rebirth will follow. One's mind will start to become calmer, and all other good qualities in the Dharma will come about in dependence on this basis, this foundation, that is ethical restraint. So in this way, by recalling the benefits of practice, exert yourself, and exert yourself with humility. Don't think you know better, you can do it your own way. Train precisely as you are being guided. And do so with the enthusiasm, with the joy, as someone who has found a large treasure. Such a person, their mind would be exuberant. When you encounter problems, recognize this is an opportunity for me to deal with something difficult and thereby step up my practice. So with a joyous mind, but with humility, exert yourself in your training. Do not be overcome or dissuaded by problems which will be encountered.
다데네 제름치게 되면 추송야디 제름치 코로나 송예베 개와 사바디 개와 오와게 송거래 다게 제베 준제 담발레 뉴웨 개와디 조군 담비 시기 제수 진바다 디 담바 신도 아니 죽규지스.
Lama Tsongkhapa concludes his written response, his letter, with the dedication. Out of love and compassion, I've given this brief advice. Through the virtue that has arisen, may all migrators be compassionately cared for by genuine spiritual mentors, and may they practice in accordance with this counsel.
다게 제베 주제 담바라 시등이 결혼들이야 펜베 삼다지 결혼들 펜도 야고쇼나 삼지마 아니 dordu지마 뉴뉴지마 결혼들이야 셰베인스 Dadi Dambalas, Juve Gawa, Sidi, Di Shebala Tinning, Gawa, Bottomeba Sayores, Dati Gawa the Karjawasan draw, Di Gawa di, and the draw Simjan, Gundi, Dambi, Kiwi Shin, Justin draw Simjan Tamjelia, Chue, Yamlengi, Rimba Dingen, Koa Dungue, the Journey, Tarba Tamji Kimiko, the Tablam Dingi, Kiwi Shin, Yahu, Chigan, Rawada, and the Kiwi Shin, Digi. Ba chue yapo ten, ane damba chi zimbaz. Di damba shindo sene, dine tenpa de loma diki ki simjan ki, di tenpa nangshin je nyamso len je, ane kiawa chi ma lada myu goba da, tarba da tamji ki myu goba tobi ki gyur sho, se de dusi no ngoa kiawa re.
The teaching is, as the meaning of the dedication is as translated. Out of love and compassion, I have given this brief advice. So Lama Tsongkhapa is expressing his care for his students, both the requester of this teaching and all others. And by writing this advice with such a motivation of love and compassion, he has accumulated great virtue. And now he dedicates that virtue so that all migrators, all beings who are bound in the suffering realms of samsara, they come under the wise and compassionate care of a genuine spiritual teacher. And here he's specifically dedicating so that the compassionate and genuine care is expressed by the teacher by training the students skillfully in how to cultivate the various topics of the Dharma in the correct sequence, not to follow their own desires, not to follow their own intuitions, but to train in the same way that all the great masters have trained themselves, including Lama Tsongkhapa. And that then is the meaning of the fourth line. And they may practice in accordance with the counsel, so that students may train precisely as their teachers are guiding them. And when a wish arises to do something a little different, that they recognize that arrogance, and with humility, they continue with effort to train in the way their compassionate and genuine teachers are training them.
Gawa pe ko sa yore je sa dine za da dine gi so su ge nyam ne je ko ha pra wa de ya an je su ira je ya da mo ba ne ya an je ge di ne an je su ira je ya da mo ba ne dine ge nyam ne ya ya je tu ba chi gi se bi ge dum ba ta ya da tu si ne ta sam da 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 ju ge sam da nyam ne je ya de ka se ne ge yun je sa mo shu sa wa di je mo nyam ne je zo wa di re dine za da dine gi ju ge chasanlia kewa sayara bache de kewa paatu me basa yor chesna dini za nga ju kewa dia da de jerim shu ngo wa na na shin je nga ju kewa dia nan ji ge nga ju nyamlen chi ne an ji ge tar sim ba yong a ji da ani mo ban ka so re zemlin ya da de sa ne yam da ma chu da dini ge kang a mong yo ba za de li ge nga ju ge kewa sa ba de la de ne an zemlin gun ya ani shi de yong wa da ma chu de ge pa shi je This
in conclusion then to say, all of you have chosen to spend what otherwise would be free time, some holiday time, to rather come together. And hopefully, from what has been presented, you've recognized just how meaningful your decision was. So I encourage you to recognize that what you have done, and that this has come about in dependence on the causes you yourself created. So rejoice in that, and with this rejoicing, set the determination to seek out and embrace similar opportunities in the future to continue your own spiritual developments. And between now and whenever such an opportunity comes again, to train in the way that has been presented here. So this I encourage you to do. And moreover, so I encourage you to rejoice and to strengthen your determination to utilize what you've learned here in your daily practice. Then furthermore, it's not only Lama Tsongkhapa who has accumulated tremendous virtue, but so have all of we. So therefore, let's dedicate in the same way that Lama Tsongkhapa has expressed here, and in addition, dedicate that there may be peace throughout our world, and think specifically where there's conflict between nations, as well as conflict between peoples, as well as conflict within families and between individuals. May peace arise in the mind of all beings. So thank you then, and we can dedicate now.